Hi, Gene Monterastelli here, the editor of tappingqanda.com. The video that you are about to watch is a conversation that was a part of this year's 24 Hours of Tapping. The 24 Hours of Tapping is a fundraiser for the amazing work that is done by the Peaceful Heart Network. The Peaceful Heart Network has brought tapping to migrants, refugees, prisoners, and the underprivileged in over 30 countries all over the world. As you watch this video, if you learned something, if you were touched by it, if you were inspired by it, the easiest way to say thank you is to support the work of the Peaceful Heart Network. To do that, all you need to do is go to 24hoursoftapping.com/support. And as you look in the description and the first comment down below, you will see a direct link to that. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Our next guest is LaQuisha Fonrose. With over 15 years of experience in the mental health field, LaQuisha has specialized in supporting individuals who have endured significant traumatic experiences, particularly complex and developmental trauma originating in childhood. She's worked in nonprofit organizations, schools, psychiatric hospitals, and founded her own private practice in 2016, driven by her passion to provide personalized care. She's on a mission. Her mission revolves around creating supportive environments for clients to navigate their traumas and create resilience, reflecting her deep-rooted commitment to mental health advocacy and support. Hello, how are you doing?
I'm well. How are you, Gene?
I'm really, really good. I'm glad we're getting to have a chance to have this conversation.
Yes.
Over the course of the whole 24 hours, we've been doing this over and over and over again, just because I love making sure that we have a starting point for these conversations, because stress is a word that we all use, and chronic stress is a word that we throw around in all sorts of ways. I would love to hear from you, just so we're kind of starting from a place of what this conversation is going to be about. When you are thinking stress, and particularly chronic stress, what do you mean by those two things? Is there a difference between those two things? Is one just bigger than the other? Like, just as a jumping off point, I'd like to start with your kind of definitions.
Yes. Thank you for asking that question, because I really want to set the foundation. Because a lot of people, everybody experiences stress at some point in life, right? Like that's something that is unavoidable, and sometimes more normalized as just like a way of life, which is okay. Because like I said, we all experience stress, and stress is essentially just the body's response to like a high demand or a challenge. And I like that definition because it doesn't mean that anything dangerous has to be happening for us to feel stressed out, right? It could be stressed out trying to juggle kids in the morning. It could be stressed out trying to get to work during rush hour traffic. So stress is just really a natural response that we experience when there's a demand.
And before you continue, I really want to underline that, because what you're saying there, high demand and challenge, because oftentimes, like when we're having an emotional response, it's really easy to beat ourselves up for having that particular emotional response. And what I love what you're doing right here, just setting the table, is you're talking about our understanding to a context that we are in. And that just like, I can just immediately feel my chest unclench just a little bit, because it's not my fault as we're stepping into this. It's how I'm interpreting what's going on.
Yep. How you're interpreting what's going on. I love that you said that. And also just how our bodies are built to handle life too.
Yeah.
Right. So our nervous system will respond to certain situations based on like a perceived threat or real threat, just to keep us safe and to keep us grounded, keep us connected. So that's always the goal of our mind and body, is to make sure that we're engaged in social engagement, safety, connection, grounding, right? It becomes challenging when the stress kind of jumps into a fight or flight response, meaning that our body is like, oh my gosh, there's something really scary happening. There's something really dangerous happening. A lot of people will call them triggers or stressors. Right. And so we're in this fight and flight response, which again is a very natural response to environmental stressors or just how we're experiencing life. Right. The next step is that our body tries to either fight the stressor. Again, it could be a morning routine. Like, let me get through this morning routine. Oh my gosh, I only have a few moments before I have to leave work, or flight the stressor. Right. Let me get away from this situation. Let me figure it out and escape for this situation. So again, it can be something as, I guess I could say simple as a morning routine, or something as big as you know, you're crossing the street and there's a bus coming at you. Like, I got to get out the way, because if I don't, it's going to be bad, right? Once that's resolved, our body goes back to that social engagement. Whew, no big deal. I'm feeling grounded. I'm feeling safe. I can engage in community, connect again. I feel relaxed and calm in my body. The difference with chronic stress is that decompression stage doesn't happen as often. So you kind of stay in this fight and flight stage for longer periods of time, and you feel under pressure and overwhelmed, almost with no relief indefinitely, until you get support around that.
Yeah, and another one of those words that I want to underline in there, as you're kind of talking about that before we kind of get into the chronic nature of that, is the word danger. Because danger is something that is a perception. It's like, it's not an absolute. Like, there are places where it is absolutely dangerous, but like, depending on our skill set, you know, as someone who lives in New York City, who is used to growing up in winter, driving on the snow isn't necessarily as dangerous for me as a new driver who grew up in rural Florida, who hasn't been in a big city. And so the danger is not like, there's absolute things, but there's also this perception that's going on inside of it. And I have a feeling that part of what is going on when we get this place of chronic stress, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is because I am so low resource, because I'm constantly in fight or flight, I am now perceiving everything as being dangerous when it may or may not be. And so since I'm not getting a chance to do that, connect, that community, that stuff that you're talking about where that's released, it almost starts to like compound itself, even if my environment isn't compounding in its complexity or its danger.
Yes, I love that. That's absolutely true. And you talk about driving on snow. And although I live in California, snow's like 3 hours away. That's not my norm.
Right.
So, you know, if I were to live where you are, or my body might be like, we're not used to this. We don't know how to navigate this. And now this feels very dangerous for us, because this is not something that we're used to. It's not familiar. Right. So when the body feels familiarity, it does decrease the danger, and there's more resources, because it's like, okay, we figured out how to navigate this. And then also there might be a lot of different threats or stressors back to back where there's no room to decompress. Right. So it's low resourcing internally, where it's like, I don't have capacity. I don't know how to process this stress. And so now everything's compounded, and I'm outside of my window of tolerance, meaning like I can't tolerate this. And then there's external factors where it's like, okay, this thing has happened. Now this thing has happened. Now this thing has happened. And they're very high stress events where our bodies are like, we don't even have capacity to hold this. I say, like with social media now, a lot of people are on social media, or even the internet. So we get a lot of information coming at us, which could be a really great thing. But also, as humans, we need time to digest one moment at a time. And currently, there's so much coming at us at one time. Our bodies and our brain don't have capacity to process it all. And if we don't have the awareness or the internal resources to be like, well, that was a lot, I think I need to take a break from this and get back to my grounded state, then those things can cause chronic stress as well.
Yeah, and like we even have like coined the frame doom scrolling, where you're literally just like consuming all of this stuff. There's actually a sports commentator who just like transformed my life when he was just talking about pop culture and the movies and things that he consumes. He said, I don't do recreational sadness. Like, there's information that is useful for me, and I need to be aware of the world, but like finding a place inside of that is healthy, where I'm getting a chance to process, to understand, to see what's going on in my world, in the world. So I'm engaged, but doing it in a way, like you're saying, where I actually get to process, I actually get to understand. Because if something happens and all I'm seeing is 17 hysterical responses to what is going on, that someone else's response, which may just be personified for response, click, and all of that sort of stuff. And now I'm having all of that dumped into me, and I'm not getting a chance to do what you're saying there. And I'm wondering, inside of that, if like one of the compounding factors, or one of the parts that like make it feel more dangerous, is our perception of control. Because so much of this information we're consuming is places that are not in my community, or not inside of what I can respond to. And so now I'm just going, oh, this horrible thing. and I'm completely helpless to that.
Yeah, and that would be a stress response or perception of like lack of control, right?
Yeah.
In some ways, and I talk about this in my work, in some things we don't have control,
Right.
right? And being able to recognize that and understand that, but also shifting to where we do have control would be a tool or a skill. But I hear you with the perception of control or lack
Yeah.
of. And then there's also the symptom of like, okay, now I feel hopeless. I feel like there's nothing that I can do about it, which compounds the stress and
Yeah.
kind of breaks down the nervous system. Excuse me, my voice is still going in and out.
It's all
um,
good.
which again creates the chronic stress, right? That long period of time. There's so much information. I love the saying of I don't engage in recreational sadness.
Yeah.
Those kinds of things are really important and kind of cues for you to look out for. Like, okay, I'm starting to feel hopeless. I'm starting to be on social media a lot. And we can copy and paste this to other experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm feeling fatigued. I'm feeling low energy. It might be time to take a break. And that's where those internal resources come in to recognize like, okay, this is how my body is responding. I think I'm stuck in a stress cycle. I'm
Yeah.
kind of in a fight or flight or freeze right now.
Yeah. So I'd like to tease some of that out there because like years ago, I had a friend of mine who wanted to do full-time work helping people with stress. And he thought a good way to attract clients was to create a stress survey to see how stressed you were. And when he realized that when he created that stress survey, is that people were not using that as information. They were just using it as validation. See, the expert says I'm really, really stressed. So they weren't
Yeah.
trying to respond to it and change to it. And there is this sense like in the modern world, we kind of have this given sense that we are stressed people and that's the thing. How then do we start to realize when we are moving from this place of I'm experiencing stress to I am experiencing chronic stress? Like, how does a person like internally start to know? You were starting to talk about some of those feelings and things, but I'd love it if you were just like a little more explicit. Like, what's a little checklist I can go through to see what am I feeling? What am I experiencing? To know that this might be something I really need to be thinking about.
Yeah. So I'll go over kind of like the symptoms, but also
Yeah.
I like how you're talking about teasing things out, right? What is
Yeah.
stress? What is chronic stress? And really what I talk about is like frequency, longevity, and intensity of the experience.
Yep.
So again, we're all going to feel stress at some point. It's actually a normal response. It's a healthy response to have
Yep.
some levels of stress, right? So it's not a bad thing. But if you're feeling stressed more often than not, like that frequency piece, like, oh my gosh, 5 days out of 7 days, I'm feeling stressed out and I'm feeling pressure, overwhelmed. Like I can't, make decisions. My head's always hurting. I'm feeling constipated. These are some of the symptoms, right? If you're having these symptoms, your mind's racing. A lot of people will say, I process a lot. I'm really good at processing my thoughts. And so then I ask more questions around what does your process look like? And it really is like a racing mind or ruminating thoughts, trying to problem solve with no resolve, right? Just kind of replaying events over and over. Oh, I could have did it that way. I wish this would have happened differently. Those are like more ruminating thoughts and not processing, not reflective thoughts. So that would be like a sign of stress. And if you're doing that more frequent, that would be something to look out for as well. A lot of people will hold their breath and forget that they're breathing. So if you notice that you're doing that frequently, that would be another sign. I have a lot of people say, oh, I notice I hold my breath a lot. And then I have to just kind of take a deep breath and relax my muscles. Feeling tense, shaky, sweaty. Again, these things will happen, especially like if you have a big exam coming up. I would imagine you might be a little sweaty, a little nervous, a little on edge, right? But once the exam is over, are those symptoms decreased and did they go away or are they still present? Another thing is the intensity. Like, is it so bad that you can't even show up for your exam? That would be something to look out for. And longevity. Is it lasting for a long period of time? Are you feeling stressed for 6 months, 7 months? A lot of people I go over these kinds of things in my practice and people are like, oh my gosh, I live my life this way. This is my life. Like they don't know anything different. So then that's when we identify this is actually like a chronic stress and not just a regular stress.
So when you say that, like I was introduced to a very, very similar concept by my friend Mary Ayre. She used the words frequency, duration, and intensity instead of longevity, same type thing. And I think it's really valuable for us when we're looking at what's going on. Like when I am not critically thinking about my past experience, I'm thinking about whether or not something happened. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not giving that sort of evaluation. But when we start to have that sort of evaluation, it does two things. One, it gives us the ability to more honestly assess, but two, it also helps us to honestly assess our progress. Like a side tangent version of this, we weren't working on the issue, but a client of mine said to me one time, Gene, it's really great. I'm only having seizures 6 days a week. Now that sounds horrifying to me,
Mm-hmm.
but she was recognizing the frequency had diminished in such a way that she had a full day a week that she was able to do everything.
Yep. Yep.
And so, like, as we're looking at what's going on there, recognizing not is this happening because we're humans, we are going to
Yep.
experience this, but to start to like critically thinking or being in a circumstance where I'm going to just start mentally noting every time I catch myself holding my breath, every time I am like the other example that you gave in there, I love so much is are you processing a piece of information
Mm-hmm.
or are you ruminating on a piece of information?
Mm-hmm.
Like though there for me, those two words have so much clarity and absolutely different experiences
Yeah.
because it can be really hard for me to process information. It can be stressful for me to process information. It can be overwhelming for me to process information, but that implies a beginning and a middle and an end.
Mm-hmm.
Where
Mm-hmm.
rumination is just like, I just hit the song on repeat and it's just going
Yep.
over and over and over again, and we're not going anywhere. And so, like,
Mm-mm.
that's just such a valuable self-assessment tool. The thought
Yeah.
that's running around in my head right now, is it running on a loop or is it leading from somewhere to somewhere else? And like
Right.
that gives us the ability to recognize, is this a stressful moment or am I caught in this thing? I love that, just like thinking in that way.
Yeah, being with it versus being in it, right? You can be
Yeah.
with the moment, be present with it, recognize what's happening, recognizing the thoughts, recognizing the feelings, how your body's showing up for you. And then again, like you said, being caught up in it, right? Where you're in this spiral of just the song is just playing with no end at all.
And I love the fact that what you're doing inside of this also implicitly is you're giving us permission to feel those emotions.
Hmm.
And they're natural. Like,
Yeah.
like they're natural that we're feel like it's, someone who I love dies. It's natural that I feel a sense of grief.
Hmm. Hmm.
There is a rattlesnake in front of me on the trail. It's natural that I'm afraid of that particular thing.
Yeah,
And so recognizing that like it's natural for us to be experiencing this, but this is about how do we move through it and not just stay stuck in that particular thing in it.
yep. How we move through it, not stay stuck, and also not suppress, which I've recognized too, is
Mm,
that I love that you're saying this is natural. Like it's almost expected
yeah.
that we have these responses because that's what our makeup is, right? But a lot of times people will suppress it. Oh, well, there's no reason to be stressed by this. I shouldn't feel this way. Um, I should have it all together right now. I should know better by now.
Right.
Um,
And
to
the
where
flip side of that is the badge of honor. It was stressful and I pushed my way through that particular thing. And
exactly.
there is value in pushing through things that are hard. We're not saying that
Mhm.
that's not it, but like both of those sides are unhealthy for us. For
Yeah,
us to dismiss and say, "Oh, I should be better than this," or I should be able, in the face of this, to be able to knock my way through this no matter what is going on. Like those are opposite ends of the spectrum, but they're really just opposite sides of a coin that's really unhealthy for us to be responding to it in that particular way.
exactly. And finding some type of middle ground
Yeah.
between both probably would be like the best response for
And so
sure.
then, yeah. And so then, let's say as we're having a conversation like this, I recognize the fact that I am caught in something that is chronically stressed. I notice that the
Mhm.
physiology, I'm tracking these particular things. I'm guessing it's not just as simple as like, have you tried rebooting the computer? Like, what are the things that we do then to start to like? What are some of the tangible tools or thoughts or practices
Mhm.
that we can use just in incremental ways to start to turn this down? Like, what does that look like? How do you help your
Yeah.
folks to do that?
Yeah. So having a care plan is really important. Number one,
Mm.
I want to back up a little bit.
Mhm.
Just creating the awareness, kind of like the conversation that you and I are having, right? Like,
Yeah.
what are these signs? What are these symptoms? How do I know that I'm experiencing this? Just so you're aware and you're educated on what's going on, because
Yeah.
a lot of people have normalized this way of life where they think that this is how life is, um, and that there's no relief from it.
Yeah.
So number one, recognizing, okay, this is chronic stress and there's treatment for this.
Yeah.
Um, Number two would be to have a care plan,
Mhm.
recognizing how stress shows up in your body, how chronic stress shows up in your body, right? Because the way that you experience chronic stress, Jean, might not be the same way that I
Right.
experience it. So there's a whole list of like symptoms or the way that it shows up, and just knowing like your body's cues for
Mhm.
chronic stress are important. Um, and then also having small practices throughout the day or throughout your week that help you get back to that rest and digest space,
Yeah.
that people tend to avoid, right? So it's like I'm always in fight or flight. And it might be, again, like a natural or normal state because we have things going on. Like I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I run a business. So there's a lot of momentum and
Yeah.
movement in my life where I actually have to create the rest and digest, because if it doesn't happen, it will happen whether I like it or not.
Yeah.
So I always say I try my best to control when it happens, um, because if I don't, then it'll happen for me. But create
Well,
and we'll,
yeah, well, I was gonna say in just response to that, like for me, when I know I'm in the middle of something stressful, I actually have a little kitchen timer that sits on my desk here, and I set it for 55 minutes. And then I actually have a little menu of things that I know that work for me. The alarm goes off and I take a pause for 90 seconds and I do that thing and then I continue my work day. Because I know for me, like what you're saying is absolutely true. It's important I take these breaks and it's important I take care of these cells. And I also know myself well enough that the demands of my day are going to be coming
yeah.
at me. And I actually have to do something to myself to interrupt and puncture my day to make sure these things happen because like it's really easy to tell the difference between things that are important and unimportant. I might not make
Hmm.
good choices, but
Hmm.
it's difficult to tell the difference between things that are important and things that are essential.
Actually.
The things that are important typically have a deadline to them. The things that are essential are my self care and that sort of stuff. Well, the important things have a deadline. This thing needs
Hmm.
to be done by the end of the day. My
Hmm.
child is asking for my attention right now. And so it's really easy for me to fall into doing those things and not doing the thing that is there for me. And
Hmm.
so I love the fact that you're saying have a plan. Don't
Yeah.
just expect, because like when I'm stressed, I am least likely to remember to take care of myself. Like that is the moment
Yeah.
I'm not going to have the willpower to do it. And
No.
so like figuring out what the plan is, like I love the fact that you're just like calling it out, so know what your plan is. Like
Yeah.
wherever you work, you probably have a fire escape plan. You know, you
Hmm.
probably have a plan with your family if something goes wrong. Like we need to have these
Hmm.
plans for ourselves as well.
Exactly. And what I also hear you saying is like that routine, right? It's
Mhm.
right there. It's kind of routine. Like, when you're doing something stressful, the routine is that you have your menu right there and you have your
Yep.
timer right there. Because a lot of times when you are under stress, you're not thinking, oh, I need to take care of myself.
Right.
So if these routines are built in, it's easier for it to become kind of like muscle memory. This is something I
Yeah.
just do every day, or this is something I always do when I'm doing something stressful, right?
Yeah.
Versus waiting until you feel stressed and then you're like, okay, I'm going to have my timer out. I'm going to put my menu out. Like that probably won't happen. And I talk
And
to people about that all the time. Like you're waiting until
yeah.
it's game time to implement the tool. Like
Yeah.
you
I,
got to
I like
practice these
I
things.
can't climb into bed without brushing my teeth. Like I just feel no
Mhm.
matter what has happened today, no matter how tired I am, like it is uncomfortable because for 10 years of my life, Gene David, brush your teeth, go put on your pajamas. Like that was
Mhm.
something that one of my parents said to me every single day because that was the routine at the end of the day. And now it is just
Yeah.
muscle memory. And I just reach for that thing that creates dental health. These sorts of
Right.
plans are no different if we make them routine in that way.
Exactly. Exactly. So having a plan,
Yep.
making it routine, and then also I like to say do something that engages like your body, like some type of movement or nervous
Mm.
system regulation, right? So a lot of people will think that self-care or having a plan, um, might be like, at least for women, like mani pedis or
Right.
traveling or, um, I can't think of some others right now. Journaling is a good one. I
Mhm.
don't want to undermine that. But
Yeah.
I'm big on doing something that's actually going to engage like your nervous system, do something somatic, because that's where you're feeling it on a somatic level, especially with stress. It happens a lot in the body. So really getting back into your body to activate that rest and digest would be like top tier.
And I love the fact that like there are things that I do that are restorative that I am receptive of, and
Hmm.
there are things that I do that are restorative that are active for me. And
Right.
I am the exact same way. The restorative things that are active do because for me, my and I don't know what's going on in my body, but this is my lived experience, is
Hmm.
that when I am being receptive, it's tuning down things.
Yep.
When I am being active, not only is it tuning down, it's also filling up at the exact same time. And so
Yep.
I'm getting two things. I'm releasing something that is stressful, but I am pouring something back into me
Yep.
because I am doing something that is active and engaging in that particular way. So
Yep.
I'm like getting two things at once, not just one of those things.
Right. And again, like you talked about earlier, um, capacity, right? Like some
Yeah.
people don't have the internal capacity. So as you're pouring back into yourself, you're widening that capacity or that window of tolerance to be able to handle
Yeah.
things that might not feel as intense
Yeah.
if you are implementing these practices, right? It might still be stressful.
Yeah.
I can't say that it won't be stressful, but the
Right.
way that you show up in that stressor might feel really different if you're pouring into yourself.
And I love that capacity word. So, like, one of the things I help lots of small business owners, just because the way my brain works, is creating systems and managing time and all of that sort of stuff. And I'm always sharing with my clients, I don't have systems so things go perfectly. I
Hmm.
have systems so that when they go wrong, I am more resilient to those things that are going wrong.
I
I am
like
experiencing the same problems anybody else is having, but they
that.
impact me less because
Mhm.
I have ways of responding to things. Exact same thing. When
Yep.
I'm in a good mood and I get a grumpy email from someone, I respond to that differently than if I'm sitting down and I'm at my wit's end and I'm overwhelmed and I get
Mhm.
that grumpy email. Like, even though the email is exactly the same,
Yeah,
my
it feels less
capacity, where
dangerous.
I'm starting on that is like sometimes like, whatever, no big deal. Where other times I
Mhm.
might literally I might be at tears at my desk because, oh my gosh, I failed this person, or oh, my business is never gonna
Mhm.
work because
Mhm.
of where I am when I'm receiving that. And so I
Yep.
love what you're talking about here is, it's not about eliminating the stressors from my life, but if I transform the way I show up in the world, I'm impacted differently, not
Mhm.
impervious, but I'm
Mm-mm.
impacted differently by the way they show up when they show up.
Yeah, and things feel less dangerous, right?
Yeah.
Whereas before, like, that perception of the email might have felt like danger to your nervous system and your brain,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
But more
Yeah.
capacity, it might still be annoying, it might still be
Right.
stressful, but it doesn't feel dangerous. It feels like
Yeah.
you have capacity and resources to navigate that stressor.
Yeah. It's amazing how, like, my ability to recognize the context and nuance of something is directly proportionate to how I feel in my resource state when that particular thing shows up.
Mhm.
You know, for
Mhm.
years and years and years working with high school students, I used to do a workshop for high school students that was literally called "No one's ever made a good choice at 3 o'clock in the morning." Because it's just a consequence of the resource state.
Yeah.
It's less of a
Yeah.
consequence of who you are and what's like all of that is impacted in that, but
Mhm.
I compound that by being up in the middle of the night. All of a sudden, my choices are going to be less thoughtful, less deliberate. And so,
Yep.
like, recognizing how much capacity impacts our response, I think is
Mhm.
such a valuable thing. And again,
Mhm.
going back to this idea of having regular routines where I'm doing things to take care of myself,
Mhm.
you know, somewhere between when I wake up and the first 15 minutes of my day, I do 3 minutes of wordless tapping, where it's
Mhm.
just about clearing out, like I'm not doing anything specific, but I do it specifically as a capacity building activity. I'm just
Yep.
clearing the decks and trying to fill up, not where I'm going after a specific trauma or a specific stressor of the day. It's just, I know stimulating these points will transform my physiology, which changes my
Yep.
capacity as I step into
So
stuff.
good. So good. I love that you said that. I've started tapping in my car, like once I pull up at a place,
Yeah.
because I noticed that I'm kind of like, again, mom on the go. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I kind of just want to sit and just, right. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I can tap right now and just kind of create that small space and build some capacity in this moment versus like doom scrolling or pulling out my phone. What's going
Yeah.
on social media, right? It's like, nope, I'm just going to do some tapping. I'm not going to say anything. I'm just going to activate that rest and digest. So I love that you said that.
My sister years and years ago worked for an organization that did mentorship for kids in the foster care system. So she
Mhm.
was constantly encountering young people who were going through really, really difficult things. And
Mm,
so what she would do at the end of her day was after she like shut down her computer and put her voicemail on, she would go into the restroom, she'd sit on the toilet, she'd do a couple of minutes of tapping, she would flush the toilet, she would then wash her hands and her face with warm water, not saying I don't care about these people, but this again, this idea of doing something ritualistic to process through everything in the day so that as she was walking out the door, she could be fully present to her friends and family and her
mhm.
life. And so that when she walked back in the next morning, she was in a better state and well resourced so she could serve these young people who she loved
Yeah.
so dearly. But it wasn't like I'm forgetting about them, I'm walking away, but it
No,
was intentionally going, okay, how do I process the experience of today in a way that is healthy so that it's not building up?
exactly. Because I imagine she's holding a lot, working
Absolutely.
with
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
population. Like our nervous systems connect, right? You see someone in high stress, your nervous system will react to that stress.
Yeah.
And we have to actively work to stay grounded, but it doesn't mean we don't have a reaction just naturally.
Yeah.
So I hear you when you say, like, at the end of the day, she does something to just kind of flush everything out, kind of hit a reset button so that she's able to show up for everybody
Yeah.
in the best way
And again,
possible.
when that was developed, it's developed very specifically, like, flushing a toilet, washing, like doing these really symbolic things. Like we emotionally respond to symbolism in really
Mhm,
powerful ways. Like at
mhm,
the end of every single one of my client calls, I reach up into the middle of my chest and it's like an old switchboard where I'm just unplugging and disconnecting. It's not that I don't care
mhm,
about my client, but it's
mhm.
like we have done what we're going to do today in that engagement. And the next time we talk, I'm going to connect that again. So again, I'm just like giving myself just in small ways because, I'm sure you were like me, like we work with people who are going through really, really hard
Yeah,
things. And I'm
yeah.
a human and that and impacts me. And I'm not just like just letting it go. But again, I love the way you're saying here. I'm processing my way out of it
Mhm.
so that I'm ready for the next thing. I'm not just letting it go.
Yeah. Symbolisms and predictability, right? There's something
Yeah.
predictable that I get to focus on,
Yeah.
which our bodies and our brains need that to reduce stress. This is
Yeah.
predictable, right? Things
Awesome.
that are
Yeah.
unpredictable means I have no control over this, like you said
Yeah.
earlier.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So,
I love that.
as we're kind of wrapping up our time here, would you be
Mhm.
willing to lead us through some tapping that could be helpful
Yeah,
for folks in the moment, or helpful for folks to go back to on the regular? Because we make all of this available after the fact, so folks can do that as well.
absolutely. And so I love silent tapping. I heard you say
Yeah,
it earlier. It's my
yeah,
favorite, especially to teach my clients because a lot of times they'll be like, LaQuisha, what am I supposed to say? Or they
yeah,
try to get the wording down. I'm like, don't focus on the wording just yet. Just focus on the points
yep,
because that's most important. And especially when you're tapping on yourself, I'm like, your brain and your body knows what it needs. Like, you don't have to really focus on the words. When I'm tapping with you,
yep,
I need to know because I don't. I'm
yep,
not a mind reader. But if you're in the moment, you can just focus on tapping.
yeah,
So we're just going to do some tapping and breathing.
awesome.
All right. So we're just going to start on the side of our head. And we're just going to take a deep breath in and slow exhale out.
And make sure everybody watching along, you're doing this with us. This is not a spectator sport.
Thank you for saying that. I get so excited about tapping. I'm like, let's just jump into it. So we can breathe deep breaths in, slow exhale out, or if people don't feel comfortable, they can just focus on their breath and bring awareness to
Mhm.
it. I know some people have a different relationship with breath, so do what feels comfortable for you. So we're going to do top of our head again. If you feel comfortable taking a deep breath in, you can, or just focusing on your breath and bringing awareness to it. And brows. Again, deep breath in. And slow exhale out. Side of your eyes. Breathing in and out. Again, bring in awareness to breath if you don't feel comfortable breathing under your eye. And under your nose. Under your lip. Deep breath in. And slow exhale out. Collarbone. This is just a little bonus. I learned about this tool called wet noodle, so I implement it with my tapping. So on your exhale, you're just going to imagine your whole body's like a wet noodle. So you're going to breathe in, take a deep breath in, and wet noodle it out. Just relaxing every single muscle. And under your arm, breathing in. And slow exhale out. All right.
I love it. When you're talking about that wet noodle thing, it reminded me when I used to tap with my buddy Alan Davidson. At the end of the tapping, I'd say, "Great, just move a little bit," and he'd literally go. And he was just, 6'6", 300, like a mountain of a man. And even though he was in Texas, it almost like I could feel it shaking here in New York. But I love that, just giving permission to just like,
let it go.
Yeah. When we tapped with the women in the heart program on their exhale, it was always where they gave a verbal kind of push out with it as well. And so like, I love like giving us permission to just really engage in a physical level in this and giving ourselves permission to do it in that way.
Yeah. Thank you. I love the verbal one too. Sometimes I do that one. Just like let it out. I've done that one too with tapping. I like to mix different tools that don't have anything to do with tapping inside the tapping world. So I'm like, this wet noodle one. I'm like, wet noodle as you tap in and just really get.
Yeah. And what you're saying there is something that I think is just useful for all of us in all of our contexts. Like I've always thought of tapping as an accelerant. Like whatever tool you are using, tapping is like pouring an accelerant on it so it is more powerful. If you have a breathing practice, tapping is going to do it. If you have a stretching practice, tapping is going to accelerate it. And so what you're doing is you're taking this thing that already serves you really well, and we get a chance to just multiply it because we're tapping at the exact same time or vice versa.
That's so true. Awesome. I love that. Yeah.
Well, excellent. Well, thank you so much. I think like of all of the topics that we're talking about over the course of the 24 hours, I think this is the one that just hits home for everybody. And so I appreciate your super, super, super thoughtful approach to this and just giving us ways to think about it so we can start to turn this around for us in our daily lives.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, I appreciate it being here. I really enjoyed talking to you today.
If you found this interview inspiring, I would encourage you to support the Peaceful Heart Network by going to 24hoursoftapping.com/support or clicking the link in the description. And you will see on the screen right now a playlist to all of the interviews from this year's and last year's 24 Hours of Tapping. I hope you enjoyed those as well.